Hello everyone, this is Govind Kumar Chaturvedi and this is on Lawyers With for the webinar Social Media Laws and Influences Regulation and their IPR Rights. I'd like to give a brief introduction about myself. I am Govind Chaturvedi. I have been working in law since 2013. I've been practicing intellectual property rights for the last 7 years. I'm a specialist in trademark prosecution and opposition, which is the registration of a trademark at the trademark office. Currently, I'm working with LS Dower. At the LS Dower, I have been there for a good amount of time, and the current managing partner is Dr. Joshita Khemani, Dower Khemani ma'am, and very nice firm, the oldest Indian origin firm in India. Give me a lot. They have always supported me in all the work, and in fact, this topic we're going to discuss, as you'll go through the webinar with me, you'll notice that it's a very niche topic. No one's talking about it. No one's working on it. They give me the free hand to work there, and that's what I like. It's a great place that way, that give you all the legal knowledge and resources over there. So yes, the firms really does show, and I would just like to now let you through that what I'll be talking about. It'll be divided into mostly two parts. First, I'll be talking about this new social media influencers. Now, just to give anyone an idea who not what a social media influencer is, today two-way communication between people has changed because of social media. Now it is no longer a communication between two people, or like if I talk to you on the phone, that's different. But in social media, we can share images, we can share videos, we can talk, and when we do, it's not just between us, it's for a whole community in general. When a certain person has a lot more followers of the content they put, it could be because it's funny, it could be because it's informative, it could be because people want to see like a tech review or a movie review or a book review. Any of these things, when these things do understand and they come into the scenario, people tend to follow such particular individuals on social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube more than they do others. When they follow such people, these people tend to also have an influence on their followers. This particular people who have that influence on their followers, hence the term social media influencer. So, as we work on that, and as I will take you more through it, why this is becoming important, because you have to understand one thing in particular about social media influencers is it's a very unregulated and uncharted territory right now, because of there are no laws to regulate them. They mostly people do it as a secondary income, but the fact is that now courts have held them to be liable, acts have come into place to hold them liable, and as I will take you through all of this, I will give you a brief introduction on how they have to go through what they do, what they've done, and how the industry is. I have interviewed a few influencers and even people within the industry to understand how this actually works. So, without much further ado, I'll start with the presentation. Let's start. Now, let's just start with what. Let's give you how influencers can have an impact on a brand. Mostly influencers are, let's just take an example. Today, Salman Khan has 34 million followers on Instagram, 31 million followers for Ranveer Singh. However, there's this one particular boy on TikTok. He has 37 million followers. He has 1.5 billion likes on his videos, which is one quarter the population of this earth. So when that happens, if a brand has to go for more visibility or reaching more people, would it go with the celebrity or would it go with the social media influencer in the future? I would say influencer, because he'd come at 1/10 the price and he'd give you a far more reach than any other celebrity actor can. More, in fact, more of the actors, there is a sense of realism with influencer. When you see influencers say, "I use let's say a particular oil, hair oil," you would believe that the influencer has used it. You won't know, you might never know the celebrities never used it. So there's that disconnect also that people say with celebrities. One of the earliest examples of influencer and brand collaborations was Moto Z launch. This happened like way back in 2008 and 5. In this, they took out mods. They actually had a subscriber base over there where they got 16 influencers to make very unique videos. One of the unique video was by King of Random. He took the Moto Z phone, launched it into 20,000 feet into space. It was a 10-foot rocket. You can still watch the video, King of Random. 10-foot rocket. You put on YouTube, you'll see the video. It flew into space. The phone was attached. The phone went all the way back to space and came back, and it was still working. Now, what this led was the videos, and all of these videos, I'm just referring to one, there was 16, generated 11.6 million views, 38.1 million social impressions, and all this led to 120,000 clicks to Motomod's website, and 80,000 of them were first timers. So this was great. This is just a great thing for them at that point. Moving on, this is not the first time social media has been used by brands. Another time when Sony Xperia, now you can actually go visit this page. If anyone wants to put the Instagram handle, it's SONYX, no EX, Xperia, Peria. Today it's got 1.2 million followers. Sony Xperia launched a great phone, and through that they were able to use the social platform and in turn get other influencers to share their page, which led to almost 1.2 million followers for them today. Which, just putting it out there, if today a brand wants to endorse or have an advertisement, rather than spending on marketing, if they have a page with 1.2 million followers, all they need to do is just upload a post today. They don't need to go ahead and engage people, have ads, have print media ads. None of that is necessary today. A social media post today, even on their own website, which of course they've gotten the followers through the influencers. So that really helps any brand today. Now, just taking you through what an influencer needs to do. What is an influencer right now? Supposing you're a brand, you want to hire an influencer, or you are an influencer yourself. What are the rights an influencer has in his name, in his social handle, and from every point? Let's put this into perspective. A social media influencer today mostly provides education, knowledge, or entertainment. For those reasons, if they have to file a trademark, they should. If you are hiring one, they should have a trademark in class 41 of the trademark class, because this is where mostly all the entertainment educational services come. Well, since they're advertising, they should also come under class 35. Social media influencer has to have a registration class 35 too because of that. Now, additionally, keeping this in mind, if the social media influencer is reviewing or has its own beauty products, let's say, then they should come in another class, which is class 3. Maybe if they have a mobile application which they want to launch with the company, then in that case they will also need to register in class 9. So either you're a social media influencer or you're a company looking to work with one, it is always advisable that you get your trademarks registered. Why? I will tell you in the following words. Now let's start with something. I'll give you an example. There was Huda Khaitan. She had 39. Huda Khaitan was actually just a makeup artist, very small, nothing great. However, when she started her page, she started gaining tremendous amount of followers. Today she has 40 million followers on Instagram and 2 million on YouTube. Again, way more than any of the Bollywood stars today. Mr. Khaitan eventually launched a successful company line called Huda Beauty, and she went on to trademark her marks in class 3, 9, 35 and 41. Now, why I'm talking about Huda Khaitan here is because I'm going to talk about another social media influencer after that who did not register her marks. And you can see the trajectory of their careers going, eventually ones who did get the registration going up, the one who didn't get it going down. Why? Because when you have a trademark registration, there are a number of things you can do. Number one thing you can do is that you can, if someone's trying to register your trademark, you can straight off file an infringement action. There are no passing off with infringement action. The goodwill and the reputation of your trademark doesn't need to be proved. Hence, if an influencer is very famous in the circle, he can just go out and have his trademark launched. And if someone is copying his name, now this is very common as I talk to influencers, this is very common is when a social media influencer goes viral, which is when his video suddenly becomes famous and everybody, a lot of handles or a lot of fake accounts come with his name, which in turn dilutes his followers. Now, anyone who's dealt with social media or the social media platforms will be aware that their policy of taking down of accounts is very arbitrary. It's not even in India. It's based out of India. It is a problem. It is what it is on that aspect. However, if you have a trademark registration, 7 times out of 10, you can stop the person. You can stop another handle which is diluting your followers or which is diluting the followers of the influencer you've taken. So it's always advisable that they have a trademark registration in their favor. Like I said in the particular classes. Now, another example. This happened with Lauren Gray. Lauren Gray was the first proper big influencer. She went big very soon. very young. Now she's still a big influencer, big name. But however, someone already took her website. This is not something new. This happens very often. As soon, like I said, any influencer goes famous, they take anyone would come and take those domain names, cyber squat it, like we say, and when those trademarks are actually those websites are blocked, they mostly can't stop it unless they have a trademark registration. So if you need, supposing in India that we have the National Internet Exchange of India. However, if you have to file a complaint there, it is imperative that you have a registered trademark. If your trademark is not registered, then in such a scenario, you cannot file a case. This happened with Huda Ketan when she did start a Huda beauty brand. She did file, she did have a registered trademark, so it was easier for her to get the domain name over other people. Again, now if supposing you're going to the registrar of companies and you want a company name registered. However, if you see a name which is, let's just say your name is Sameer Jain, for an example, and you're a very famous influencer, and someone tries to get a company by that name registered with the ROC, Registrar of Companies. In order to institute an action with the Registrar of Companies also, you need to have a registered trademark. Hence, another reason on that. Moving beyond that, if tomorrow there is an influencer, he needs to get his goods listed on a website like Amazon or any e-commerce website. Even in such a scenario, they will need to show a valid word mark registration. Word mark, let me be, because Amazon doesn't ask for logos; they ask for word marks mostly. But if you're going with the logo, they'll also ask for the word, logo registration. So it's very important that they also have that in place. If you're an influencer, if you tomorrow want to merchandise your products, you want to open a brand, use that fame to your advantage, or if the client wants to, use your fame to their advantage and wants to open a joint brand with you, it is only important that you have a mark registered so you can actually set it on e-commerce platforms. Third reason, the custom authorities. Now, any small moving goods, let's just take any small moving goods that we have. If these small moving goods are like cosmetics or electronic goods, and they are being sold under the trademark of the influencer, which many are. Like we saw, Huda Beauty has a number of cosmetic products. A number of other influencers have their own electronic gadget products. So if they are being moved in such a scenario, when they're being moved, the custom authority will also not take action unless you have a registered trademark. So in that scenario, it is also imperative that you have a registered trademark in line with what is already being said, because these are the reasons influencer any brand today needs to have their marks registered. Now coming back to the case study of Huda Beauty and really good. Huda Beauty started off well. Today it has 43.4 million followers, huge revenues. Her trademark is registered in class 3, 9, 35 and 41. It is done in the USPTO. It is also registered in UK. Now let's take another example. Another example was Lele Pons. She had the same number of followers as Huda Beauty or Huda Ketan. She filed a trademark application only under class 41. Why? Because she believed she was only giving entertainment services. It was pending in the USPTO due to inaction. It was eventually abandoned. Then she filed an appeal. Even then she didn't sign up for the appeal. Now today, her rate of engagement, if we look at it, Huda Beauty only has 503 posts on her page. But she has 43 million followers. Leela Pons has 3,000 posts and she has 40 million followers. This is something called the rate of engagement of a follower. When you do get a influencer, you will get three things from him. One, views. Second, likes. Third, comments. Now, anyone can view the video or anyone can view the post, but the people who like it and the people who comment on it are the ones which shows how much this person has a rate of engagement or how much they can retain the people they have who were basically following them, and how much it is good for the brands to hire these people. Now moving on from the examples of the trademarks that we have talked about, let's see what are all our valid trademarks for an influencer. Now, if we come to Section 2M of the Trademarks Act, the Section 2M of the Trademarks Act clearly states that the name of a person can be trademarked and can be protected by him. Hence, if it's the name or the handle, even for that matter, if it's a combination of that, and even if the handle itself, like it could be anything unique, which is not particularly common to trade or doesn't just say anything which is which can easily be confused with another influencer, it can be definitely trademarked. And basic advice for your social media influencers out there: if you are you have a famous or you have a lot of followings on one platform, it is only advisable that you get the exact same name registered across all platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, anything and everything, Pinterest, even the smallest of them, Pinterest, Tumblr, all of these, because then no one can ever misuse that name, no one can ever claim rights over it over you. Now, coming to a case, let's just take an example where someone's personality, like we call them, the personality rights, was misused. The case is Titan Industries versus Ramkumar Jewelers. In this case, what had happened was Titan Industries had a sub brand, Tanishq, and Tanishq was basically had an ad series with Amitabh Bachchan and Jaya Bachchan. Thereafter, in Muradabad, this Ramkumar Jewelers used the exact same advertisement, just removing the name of Tanishq and putting its own name and making it look like Amitabh Bachchan and Jaya Bachchan had marketed for them. Now, if I have to go through that, the basic question is, why did Titan Industries file the case and not Amitabh Bachchan? Well, this is something of importance both for companies and influencers. Is you have an agreement of services. An agreement of service clearly states that when you provide a service for a company, the copyright in that particular ad, photograph, content, user-generated content, as most social media influencers, belongs to the company. Basically, that is the reason they can institute the suit and not Amitabh Bachchan and Jaya Bachchan. Again, this going through this, an agreement of services is always constituted between the influencer or the personality who's a big name or who has fame, and that person hands over the right in particular to only the ads or advertisements or they have worked on with them, and they in turn hand it over to the company, and the company has complete copyright over it. That's it. That is why Titan Industries went after Ram Kumar, and eventually the court opined when the identity of a famous personality is used in advertising without permission, the complaint is not that one should not commercialize their identity, but that the right to control when and where and how their identity is used should vest with the famous personality. The right to control commercial use of human identity is the right to publicity. Basically, meaning if someone has fame in what they've done, someone has earned a reputation, someone is known to the public, only he has the right to decide how it will be used and by whom. Now, give you another example of how social media has worked and how companies have used social media very well, or how influencer is, how it is connected to influencer. There's a very famous hashtag. Now, an hashtag is something that you just put the four common symbol with the word. Eventually, it takes a italic shape. And what happens in social media is hashtags also have its own followers. So you can click on a hashtag and show you how many people are following it. Like supposing I cook. So, like one of the famous hashtags is hashtag quarantine. So anytime anyone does something, they're like, oh, quarantine days or quarantine effect. So when you do put it in there, you'll see everyone who's put a post with that particular hashtag. Hashtags also now are being considered as trademarks. So if you as a company or you as a influencer have bought a hashtag to the forefront and it is being recognized, it has goodwill and reputation among the masses, and it can be traced back to you. You can show that you were the originator of it. It can be registered as a trademark. Like, let me give you an example, a very, very interesting example. We all know Taco Bell. Taco Bell is a restaurant based in the United States of America, very famous. However, it is not available in India, but they started a hashtag, sponsor me Taco Bell. Now, the concept of it was Taco Bell told all the influencers that we'll sponsor you. We'll look into you, we'll give you sponsorship, we'll even think about you, but what you need to show me is, or you have to assure to me is, that you have to put a video, you have to show me great user content. Now, without spending a penny, sponsor me Taco Bell. Got almost, this is one hashtag which I'm looking at, or which I have over here, is 5 lakh views. You can put the hashtag on TikTok, hashtag sponsor me Taco Bell. With every influencer making a video saying, please give me the chance to be sponsored by Taco Bell, because just having that on their resume as an influencer is big. Each of these influencers probably has, I don't know, like at the minimum 1,000, 2,000 followers. This got great publicity for the company. It jumped by the company's reputation jumped by bounds. It's happening in India, even though it's a restaurant not available in India. But now the reputation far precedes the earlier product. Now, whereas we have talked about trademarks, on what an influencer needs to safeguard, we also need to understand that the influencers today are not all of them are regulated, or they don't know what they're saying and they don't know how they're saying it, and sometimes they have an influence with people. And like the great quote, with great power comes great responsibility. It is also im- important that these influencers know their rights and at the same time know their responsibilities to the people, because they could be telling a lie and they could be sponsored by a company and not tell this to the people, and the people would actually believe that this product is good. Misleading advertisement. So just working on these lines, let me give you an example of how far a reach advertisement of a influencer goes. A basic idea is Kylie Jenner. She's got 17 crore followers. She charges 1.2 million per post. Her rate of engagement is 1 million likes. I'm not kidding. That's not views. She gets 1 million likes. That's 10 lakh likes on her profile, and she gets anywhere from a lakh comments to 2 lakh comments. One of the highest rate of engagement of any follower. She is endorsing products. Every post she puts is literally another product or another. However, this has brought, like I said, this sector has led to a lot of problems in a lot of countries. India is not the only one. One of the first cases was in a German court where an influencer endorsed a product, turned out to be bad, and the courts held him liable, stating that if you tomorrow are, as social media influencers, if you're working on it, then in such a scenario, I will clearly state that the court stated that you have to put the words ad, hashtag ad. Now, and the influencer I was talking to, she clearly told me that she was working with a lot of companies. One of the companies made them put a review of a product. Of course, it was given to them by the brand. She, of course, disclosed that in the video. But what she didn't put was a ad hashtag. None of them did. None of the influencers did. That wasn't a requirement. That was never spoken about and everything. But however, a week later they came and said that please put the ad hashtag. But that doesn't hold value anymore because the post will go viral in the first 2 to 3 days. So ad hashtag, yes, it should be added for influencer whenever they're putting an ad out there. That was the German court's opinion about it. And whereas they use the word Verbang and Adzag, which was a challenge for English speaking countries, most companies have adopted this strategy of telling their influencers to go out there and actually putting and making people understand that this does exist, and they have to be careful that because they can't mislead the people who are following them. Now coming closer home, another case happened like this was in the Bombay High Court. This was the first time influencer was taken to court over one of the reviews they've taken. The influencer was Bansali. He made his sole living from creating and publishing content on the YouTube channel Beauty Chopra. His is a lifestyle channel, like what boys can do, how to do boys grooming, or how men what suit they should wear, what products they should use. The viewership of his content generates revenue for him. One such video landed him before the court in a suit by Marico Limited because he criticized the parachute hair oil, primarily based on the freeze test. The fact that he was actually a MSc in biotechnology also helped and led more to his credits in the claims. Now he had less than just 1.5 lakh followers, not a great number, but again, he put up a video saying parachute oil is not worth it, and I'll prove it. Well, based on the review of video and insufficient material that he had relied on, the single judge of the Bombay High Court observed that the reputation of the plaintiff product is impacted, where the customers are induced not to purchase its product because of the video of the influencer. To analyze this further, the court examined some of the comments on Bansali's channel regarding the video, where several customers of Marico had expressed their decision to stop purchasing the product after watching the video, which is of course very sad. The court opined saying that freedom is always on a higher pedestal than reputation, even though both are fundamental rights. However, if society is reposing trust in what they say, then the trust comes with an obligation. The problem with the internet and social media nowadays is that there is so much information that people mistake it for knowledge. Basically, what the court stated was that people are gonna believe whatever you say. It is up to you to make sure that you don't say it in a wrong manner, and that's why we have to hold you liable this time. Because when you spoke about the company and you compared the products, you didn't do it on scientific basis. Now, if and only if he was working and he was going from the point of view of stating it as you know he had based this on real, actual, proper opinions or scientific facts, it won't have been such a problem. Now, I did speak to the counsel who worked on the matter. Very nice, Mr. Kamo. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. He did talk to me at length about the matter, and what he did explain to me was, Govind, remember this, that if tomorrow there is a restaurant, it could be XYZ restaurant. I believe it is the best restaurant in the world. You believe it's not that good. You can say, I don't think the restaurant is good. But you cannot say that the restaurant is bad, it's horrible, there are holes in the sheet over there, that they put too much salt in the food, there are rats in the kitchen. You cannot do that. That is a matter of fact. But when it is a matter of opinion, you as an influencer can express it and state that, I don't think it is this way, but these are my reasons for it. However, if you say, no, this is it, this is how it's going to be, this is how it will be, well, then the court will hold you liable. However, in an appeal, the influencer was able to get the decision overturned. In the appeal, the influencer allowed to keep the video, but with a few changes. The influencer clearly stated that what he had stated were actually not just facts, but he he did have his own point of view on it. And when the court opined, they were of the opinion that okay, he is making sense. He is clearly stating what he has to. He hasn't tried to exactly uh, mislead the public as much as he's tried to give a form of opinion. At the same time, he's been truthful about it. And the main problem was Marico's written statement didn't come to their rescue, because a lot of things that the influencer had said were actually in the had been admitted by Marico. And like he said that this is not oil, this is not hair oil, this is not coming from coconuts. So, but however, on the image of the bottle, there were two coconuts showing the oil coming out. And when in the Marico filed the written statement, written statement, they clearly stated that they get the oil from copra. And this eventually led, of course, this led to the court defining that the boy's facts are actually right. So we cannot go in. It's a mix of opinion and facts. So they made him change the title of the video, delete some main points from the video, and re-upload it, which was fair. And this became a major case because what needs to be looked at, usually single judges, division bench don't really interfere in single judges. This is not at the interim stage at least. And when they did, they actually overturned the decision. The boy went, one influencer was able to take on a corporate like Marico and defeat them. Eventually, if you go to his post is to the 100% oil. His channel is Bearded Chokra. You can still see the post over there. If you go see the comments, his followers have stated things like, this is one, you took on a giant like Marico and you won. You're right, their oil is not that great. Their oil smells. In fact, it has led to a barrage from the other side, people supporting him even more and going against Marico. So just to give you an idea about how these influences can have an effect. Now, let's go to the next one. Now, let's come to the fact that why, whereas these are just mostly case laws, now we will talk about the new Consumer Protection Act 2019 that has just come into effect last year. Like I said, influencers have been bought in the ambit of laws and codes, but this has just started a year. And this is an industry which is going to grow at an exponential rate in the next 1 or 2 years. And if we are ready for it, it will really help. So, like going by Consumer Protection Act has for the first time, earlier we had the ASI guidelines. The ASI guidelines just stated normal that these were just regulatory. They weren't enforceable in a court of law. You couldn't tell people that, follow these, do these. You couldn't. You could put a complaint, there'd be an issue that it won't be enforceable. However, the Consumer Protection Act has now made sure that misleading advertisement is a crime and you can be held liable for it. Let me read out what false advertising means. Consumer Protection Act not only amplifies the definition of misleading advertisement, but also empowers authorities to impose penalties of false and misleading advertisements. A misleading advertisement is one that, number one, falsely describes a product or service, gives false guarantees or likely to mislead consumers as to quality of a product or service. Point 3, conveys a representation that would constitute an unfair trade practice. Point number 4, deliberately conceals important information. So, looking back at it, what are the 4 points? Falsely describes the product. Like if I say this product is horrible because it's got these things in it, turns out those things are actually good for the product. I'm falsely describing the product. Likely to mislead the consumer if I promise my consumer that, oh, this oil is very good. It actually gets this. It'll help me grow my hair and everything. It could be a false positive. That's likely to mislead the consumers. Now it conveys a representation that would constitute an unfair trade practice. Again, disparagement. If I have to take two products and say my product is better because of this, and those facts are not true, I can be taken to court, which is unfair trade practice. And conceals important information. If I'm putting something in the product which could be harmful to people, which I am not brought to the notice of everyone, that conceals important information. Now, what are the powers of the Consumer Protection Act under 2019 to deal with the misleading advertisement? Now, consumer protection authorities can conduct investigations whether any advertisement is false or misleading or prejudicial to consumer interests. They can have directions to continue the advertisement, and so also impose penalties. The first penalty will be 10 lakhs and can go up to 50 lakhs on subsequent contravention. 10 lakhs to 50 lakhs, I'm sorry, which is EU. So what should an influencer or a company, if you're hiring an influencer, do? Very simple. The influencer or should disclose when they've been paid, given or loan things. Now, one of the basic ways of working is that now a lot of companies have influencer management teams. What that means is that they have teams that will work with influencers, get them the basic rights, make them understand that this is the thing. They will pay one influencer, and with 50 influencers, they'll have a barter system. The barter system is very clear, where they will give the product, and in return for the product, the influencer will put a review, and they'll pay one influencer. So basically, whenever you've been paid, given or loaned a thing by the company, don't influencer should say he's bought it, he thinks it's great, he thinks it's amazing. He should clearly state that he's been given that by the company. He is reviewing it for them. May not be an advertisement, but he is reviewing it for them. Be clear about the relationship with the brand or business, including any past relationships. This is very important. They should just not believe that because they had a past relationship that will never come to the fore, they shouldn't mention it. Yes, they should mention it in the video. Again, influencer is respected for its realism and its connection with the audience. It doesn't have that holier than thou or god-like stature, as we would like to say. He's got more of a human one-to-one with each one of his followers. So he has to make sure that he's being completely truthful, and he has to tell all past. If he's done advertisement for them earlier, but he's not doing now, he should clearly bring that into the forehead. Third point, not be misleading and not suggest they have used a product when they have not. I can't stress on this. This is very wrong. If they are just taking money and from loan things, and companies are saying just say it without using it, it is not. They have to use it before they pass it on to their own followers, or that they bought something which was in fact gifted. So if they haven't tested a product, not to pass it on further. Whereas brands should adopt consistent policies so that endorsement by influencers are labeled correctly with the right keywords, like we talked about. Add hashtag. Agreements with influencers should have clear rules for posts. Like I said, that all of these posts have to go through this dictum. Not that the influencer at some rate is doing something just to get his followers correct, and the company and the brand gets bad name because of it, because then they've hired an influencer that has done something wrong over there. And to ensure that influencers operate within the required, brand should review influencer posts to check compliance. Let me read that again. And to ensure that the influencers operate within the requirements, brands should review influencers' posts to check compliance. Basically meaning that before anything, the influencer management team should also have a legal team attached to it, I believe, who is doing a research on this. Any company should at least have one legal counsel who's working on these aspects of misleading advertisements, trademarks and all of that. That tomorrow, what is the future with these influencers? We can give them our products, but these influencers at one time are now going to come cheap. And when they do not come cheap, you want as much influence, as much reputation that come out of it, and you don't want any bad reputation to come out of it. So before of these ways, you should check the posts, you should check compliances with it. This is basically my aspect on social media influences and the advertising guideline they should follow. This, I think, really does sum up what I want to say. Now, as an individual, now not all of us are influencers, not all of us are companies, but there are certain social media laws that I would tell everyone to be a little wary about, because as we say, social media is no longer outside the scope of law or courts. People are held liable, people are taken to court, people are being made to be punished. However, we are not aware of it, and we still think it's an unregulated and uncharted territory. It's not. It's a very regulated and a very charted territory. So let me just start off with basics of social media law. Now, what is the advantage? Like you've talked about, it's great for communicating with people. People who have not known each other for 40 years get in contact through social media. It is just amazing that you can show through interactive mediums your love or your care for people, by posting pictures on their walls, writing great messages for them, their birthdays, celebrating their birthdays. In fact, I believe that social media has made people their own PR agents. They are going out and doing things which they never would have because they want to put it on social media. So that is one of the advantages. But the disadvantages is like, if anyone remembers High Five or Awkward or MySpace, anyone who goes on those accounts today or who had those accounts today knows that those places are no longer great places to go because they've been wrought with just cyberbullying, child porn, fake news. One of the basic and the most recent cases being of the boys' locker room case, where it has just become clear that the girl was the one who had a character wanted to create a character test on the boy, and she was misrepresenting herself as the boy, and she had a fake Instagram account. Again, these things are very common. If you want and go through it, there are 25 crimes rather, on the cyber government website, which you can go and report. I will give the URL link for it at the end of it. And also note, if you file a false complaint, it is actually a very big crime to file a false cyber complaint. Anyway, going about it, what is one of the main issues that social media faces? Well, one of the basic issues that has come to court and as an individual you can be liable for is defamation. Now, there are two types of defamation: libel, which is a defamatory statement published in a written form, and slander, which is a spoken word. Now, libel was something that people, only editors or newspaper owners or reporters could be held liable for. But now that is not the case, because today I can put up a normal status on my Facebook account, it'll reach thousands of people and it'll be in written form. And there is no way of knowing how broad a coverage it has had, how many people have shared it, and the damage in monetary value. Because earlier that was not the scenario. Earlier it had to be in a newspaper where there was a print circulation, there was a normal thing. However, because of the coming of social media, this is no longer the case. Now let's take an example. Now, all through defamation is the medium of committing the act in the physical world and the digital world are different. The law of defamation applies the same. The liability regarding cyber defamation in India can be on the author, and second on the intermediary liability, meaning the social media platform where it has been broadcast from. However, so in India, they are not held to be liable under. The intermediary will not held to be liable, unless it does any of the acts under Section 79 2B of the Information Technology Act. Now, what are those things? If the intermediary initiates the transmission, selects the receiver of the transmission, or selects or modifies the information contained in the transmission. So if they're initiating it, if it's not me not putting it, it's someone from my account, it suddenly comes out from my account. If I'm not the one receiving, like I get to decide on Facebook who I can send this message to, suddenly the intermediary sends it to 10,000 people by themselves. And third, they modify the information I've sent. If I was to say that the government is doing great work and they say the government is doing horrible work, they're liable. Further, this protection is also subject to the condition that the intermediary shall comply with the due diligence and intermediary guidelines requirement issued by the government, and also remove such unlawful content on being notified by the appropriate government or its agency or upon receiving actual knowledge. That comes under Section 79(2)(c) of the Information Act. Again, 79(2)(b) and 79(2)(c) of the Information Act. 79(2)(b) talks about in what cases the intermediary can be held liable. However, let's first, since there are two parts, I will first deal with the authors and how they've been held liable across a number of cases, and then I'll come to intermediary liability, because that is a subject in itself. And what is very important to understand about intermediary liability is how IPR has had a great effect on it. So let's start off with the very basics of defamation. The first such. Now let's get one thing very clear, that there are two ways that defamation can take place. Now there is a single publication rule and there is a multiple publication rule. The multiple publication rule comes from the Duke of Brychas versus Harmer. It's an 1849 UK case. This was followed in UK till 2012-2013. What happened in UK in 1849 was that something about the Duke had been written 17 years ago. That time the limitation was only 6 years. So he sends an agent to go buy a newspaper again from the same agency who had it in their archives. The agent went, bought a new newspaper, and then the Duke went to court and stated, see, they've sold the paper after 17 years. My limitation restarts from here. And the court said that, yes, correct. If the information is being restructured or being resold even after 17 years, that is the fresh cause of action. Now, this rule came under a lot of fire for a number of years. Now, the problem with this was that, whereas this was okay for print media, that each time a new newspaper was sold with new news in it and new defamatory statements, each time a new cause of action was created. But what about the digital media? What about social media posts? They are there forever. And each time you click on them, is that a new cause of action? This was something that was expounded upon in Khanwar Birth versus Asif Nazir Mir by Vipin Sanghi. It was a great judgment. Please read about it. It's CSOS 290/2010. The order date is 7th November 2013. In this, what happened? The plaintiff and there were two defendants. The plaintiff's wife was defendant number 2, and defendant number 1 was having an affair with defendant number 2, which was the plaintiff's wife. However, defendant number 1 and 2 colluded, and they put out defamatory statements against the plaintiff stating that he was having an affair with defendant number 1's wife. A little convoluted. Plaintiff number's wife is defendant number 2. Defendant number 2 is having an affair with defendant number 1, and they both made false statements on Facebook saying that plaintiff is having an affair with defendant number 1's wife. So, which was of course false. Now, eventually, this came to the court, and the first posts were on 28th of October, 30th of October 2008, 5th of November 2008, and 25th of December 2008. However, the first case, the case was filed on the 11th of Feb 2010. Now, the problem that started here was that the court stated, and the argument of the plaintiff here were very valid in certain ways, was say that a print media cannot be withdrawn, but a social media on platform, the comment can be deleted. So, hence, there is a new cause of action every time someone's looking or reading it. However, the court disagreed and stated the same. They went through a number of case laws, and there were two main aspects they had to look at. That time, UK was applying the multiple public publication rule, whereas in US, they were using the single publication rule. The difference is not for anything else, but for the freedom of the press. If you give an unfettered power of multiple publication rule, the press can be bought. They could have newspapers in their archives, which they anytime can sue them for defamation at any point in time in the future, and the limitation period will restart every time. So, for keeping that in mind, the court adopted the single publication rule from the United States and applied it. It was a very well researched judgment, very well written. The judge opined, I am of the view that single publication rule is more appropriate and pragmatic to apply rather than the multiple publication rule. I find the reasoning adopted by the American courts in this regard to be more appealing than the one adopted by English courts prior to the amendment of the law by the introduction of the Defamation Act, 2013. It is the policy of law limitation to bar the remedy beyond a prescribed period. The legislative policy would stand defeated if the mere continued residing of defamatory material or article on the website were to give a continuous cause of action, like I stated, to sue for defamation or libel. Of course, if there is republication, now this is very interesting. If supposing someone has written defamatory statements a year ago, and Facebook has that option of sharing a memory, and if someone wants to click on it, share the memory, that is a new cause of action. But as long as the post stays and it's 1 year old, don't worry, no defamatory statement, nothing can be liable against you. Now let's go look at the very first case of cyber defamation. This was SMC Pneumatics versus Jogesh Quatra. Jogesh Quatra was a discontinued employee. Post leaving the firm in 2003, in 2000, he sent obscene messages regarding the managing director on written email to everyone. What this led to was eventually they had to trace the email back, and the problem was most of these emails were forwarded to eventually the final person. They found a private investigator who found out that the email had been sent from Connaught Circus, a cyber cafe in Connaught Circus, which near Connaught Place, and eventually they took a group photograph of the picnic of one of the outings of the company, and they showed it to the attendant at the cyber cafe, and he he understood and he said, yes, this is the person who comes to this cyber cafe. There was an interim injunction granted in this, but in the long term, this case failed for a number of reasons. Once the court said that the final injunction cannot be given in this because there's no balance of probabilities, which is based on evidence, and the photograph wasn't put on record. There was no 65B evidence affidavit, and the attendant who had identified the identity who had acted as a witness for the photograph was also not brought on record. So whereas this case was great for interim injunction, in the long term it failed on the balance of probabilities. The second case that comes around, this is a Facebook account. This was a High Court of Orissa case where Kalandi Charan Lanka versus State of Orissa. This girl decided not to marry a boy and he made fake accounts and he sent obscene messages against her. Now this case, if nothing else, is very interesting on how the cyber cell works. If you are to put a case with the cyber cell, this is how it went around here. The cyber cell did their own research, got in contact with the Facebook law enforcement response team. The Facebook law enforcement team also got in touch with the mobile service providers. The nodal officers were basically Vodafone, Bharti, Aircel, Tata Telecom, Reliance, Idea, BSNL. And after extensive investigation, came to know that the accused had accessed and operated the fake account using the Vodafone account in the name of the victim, girl, through internet by using Vodafone ISP and Airtel ISP. The investigation officer also found a good number of SIM cards with different IMEI numbers have been used by the accused to commit the offense. So this was a great case if you want to look at how investigation goes in terms of when you do put a cyber complaint with the cyber cell. Again, the case is Kalandi Charan Lanka versus State of Odisha. Now coming to, this is the first time damages were awarded for cyber defamation. This was Pentex Limited and another versus Pulak Chaudhary. In this, one person, the petitioner had filed for a compulsory and property injunction along with the recovery of 50 lakhs as damages for loss of reputation and business due to definitely emails sent by the client to international financial corporations like World Bank, President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, and Uzar Report, a news website portal publisher of monthly news reports. Eventually, the case was settled after almost 13 years and they were only paid 10%. But that was the first time damages were recognized and paid in a cyber defamation case. Again, if you want to refer to the case is Pentex Industries Limited versus Pulak Chaudhary. Now, if you do want to go and register a complaint, or you know anyone who's being harassed, there are a number of how do I put it? Crimes that can take place. Some are called cyber grooming. Which cyber grooming is when an elder person gets in touch with a younger person and makes them do evict acts. There are a lot of things that go wrong. One of them, the basic thing is that you can go on www.cybercrime.gov.in. They will direct you to the number of list and another on which will give you the complaint. But like I said as I said earlier, these are very serious complaints. They cannot be taken lightly. If you have filed a complaint against someone, taking someone's name, and that person turns out to be innocent, that person can sue you to Kingdom Come. Be careful. So yes, again, I won't disagree with that. The URL is cybercrimes.gov.in. Okay, I have a very interesting question by Shahil Chauhan. I'll refer to it at the end of it. So let's moving on from individual point of view. Let's look at it from an intermediary point of view. What is intermediary liability? How did it come about? Intermediary liability for the first time earlier was expanded upon in the Shreya Singhal versus Union of India case, where it was held liable that section 66A was basically had a very wide interpretation. And what had happened with 66A was that you could easily file a complaint with anyone and anybody picked on from the house. The main time this blew up was with the death of Bal Sahab Thackeray. There were a lot of riots going on and this one girl put a complaint and the police came and arrested the girl under 66A, which the court said was wrong. That it's got such a liberal interpretation, you can't just let it, So for the first time, court talked about actual knowledge in Shreya Singhal. In Shreya Singhal, they discussed how the intermediaries need to have an idea of what they're being taken about or what they're being talked about, and they expounded about exponentially held 66A to not be constitutional, but however they did uphold 79(3)(b). The court opined 79 is a valid subject to 73(b), being read down to mean that the intermediary, upon receiving actual knowledge from a court order or being notified by the appropriate government or its agency that unlawful acts relatable to Article 19(2) are going to be committed, then fails to expeditiously remove or disable access to such intermediaries. Similarly, the IT Act with the IT guidelines of 2000 are valid subjects to Rules 3 and Sub-Rule 4, being read down in the same manner as indicated in the judgment. This marked a significant change in the intermediary liability regime in India, as previously any person could request intermediaries to take down content, and they would have no reason to do so if they felt it was unlawful. The law also, with their status of being mere functionaries, placed intermediaries in a precarious position to judge the legality of the content. In fact, the Supreme Court in Shreyas Singhal has gone on to acknowledge that intermediaries like Google and Facebook would have to act on a million requests for takedown. This really put it, because then now it put it in within the point of actual knowledge. You had to give actual knowledge about the intermediaries. Now coming to the best case after that. Now, post that, the other case that we can look at is now how IPR plays a major part in all of this. Very simply put, an IPR did lead to a lot of good for the intermediary liability. At the same time, it has been a double-edged sword. I'll tell you how. MySpace versus Super Cassette Industries was the next case after that actually expounded about intermediary liabilities. This case is important from a copyright perspective, as the division bench of the Delhi High Court in this matter reversed a single judge decision holding MySpace liable for copyright infringement. The division bench held that if intermediaries are tasked with responsibility of identifying illegal content, it could have a chilling effect on free speech. For a detailed discussion in this matter, the court also distinguished actual knowledge requirement from general to mean specific knowledge. Now, this is why it's interesting, because at that time, the court just opined stating that you can have actual knowledge, which is just stating to an intermediary that this is going to happen, this is wrong. What this case did was say you have to give specific knowledge. Now, supposing I have a product on an Amazon website which is being infringed, I need to take out all the URLs where all the product is, and I need to give that specifically to the intermediary for them to remove it. I can't just say that, oh, remove all products. I can't anymore, because this case law expounded upon that. And if the importers are pointed to specific infringing material by right holder, then they must remove such content without the necessity of a court order. Now, whereas Shreyas Singhal talked about a court order, MySpace got rid of. Under MySpace, even if someone's aggrieved, their copyright is being infringed, and they've given you enough of a reason to do so. A normal takedown notice should be enough for an intermediary to comply with it and take out the infringing material. Now, this was a copyright case. We'll go through, there was a design case, then there was a trademark case on this, and how differently intermediaries were lied. Now, one of the main reasons intermediaries cannot be held liable for the content they put on their website beforehand is because it is a aversion to free speech. If someone wants to put something, or even in the marketplace, intermediaries cannot interfere in it. The second they interfere, they become active participants at the same time. So that is also a major difference, why this is a major debate going on, that what intermediaries should or should not do. Now let's look at the second point. Now we come on to the next case, which was in Kanti and Taro. Again, Justice Rajiv Sai and Law held that the same thing, that held that in compelling intermediary to screen content would be an unreasonable interference with the rights of intermediary to carry on its business. The court also asserted that requiring intermediary to screen any kind of content would change the role of an intermediary from a facilitator to adjudicator, which would make them an active participant, which they would definitely be crossing the threshold of Section 79(2)(b). Under Section 79 of the IT Act, the intermediary is only obliged to remove content on receipt of court orders or government notification. In Kent RO, the court reiterated the specific knowledge requirement as expounded in MySpace. In this, the RO problem was a design infringement case. In MySpace, it was a copyright infringement case. Then they were able to remove such listings from their website. Well, however, this is where the problem came. Everything was going well for the intermediaries in terms of case laws, public opinion, everybody was supporting them. Then the Blue Whale case happened. We all know about the Blue Whale case. It was an app which, if you would download it, would give you 50 tasks, and by the 50th task, you would commit suicide. Now, what was very disturbing was a lot of youth around the world were doing it. There were at least I don't remember the number of deaths that happened during the Blue Whale Challenge, but I do remember clearly two. One was in Punjab and one was in Mumbai, and they were very very disturbing facts of children. How this entire psychologically pulled children into their trap, literally, of depression and playing with their minds, cyber grooming as it is called. So the problem with the Blue Whale case happened was that the Madras High Court took self-cognizance and stated that, this is wrong. You should remove the app, and you as you intermediary, you are liable for this. However, Google came and the stated that the Indian subsidiary cannot remove the content from the App Store because it's actually regulated by the US company, and the US company is not subject to Indian laws. This led to an explosion by the court, and the court was very unhappy with this, and the court expounded on it, clearly stating that you're an intermediary, you've been given a lot by us, but you at this time clearly state that you don't adhere to our laws. The court, while highlighting Google's response and noting how difficult it is for law enforcement to get crucial information, reprimanded online services, stating they cannot abdicate their duties and responsibilities under law. The court opined the service providers cannot abdicate their responsibilities. They cannot also plead that they have no control over the content. A mere look at the net neutrality debate that is presently going on would show that the service providers are in a position to have control over the content, and that over the content that passes through the information highway. If the service providers can attempt to control the content for commercial consideration, they can certainly be called upon to exercise their power of control in public interest also. Rather, they must be mandated to do so. And the court blew up on that, and the court even advised the central government, saying methods must be devised to ensure that these online platforms, which could not be bought within some trademarks, are not accessible in India. The court also requests the government to amend laws and regulations so that Indian laws are applicable to those foreign services, and law enforcement can get any action to relevant information at crucial points. This case is one of the which turned public opinion, courts, and the whole debate against them. Again, this case was very talked about, and it said that there is a limit how much we can give you our privacy and free speech, not when our children are dying. Now, Fern, the last case I'll discuss on this, second last rather, is actually I can three more on this, and I think I just have enough time. Was the trademark case. Like I said, there was a copyright infringement case that expounded on intermediary liabilities. There was a design, there was a copyright. Now, this is a very interesting case. This was a Christian Louboutin judgment versus Nakul Bajaj. In this case, what happened was that there was a website, Denvies, that actually Darvies.com, where the Louboutin were being sold. Now, the thing with this website was it wasn't a normal e-commerce website. First, you had to pay for membership. Second, the goods were packed and packaged and delivered by Darvies.com themselves. It wasn't just that they were being active facilitator between a seller and a buyer, whereas we agree that Amazon also has its warehouses, they also package it, they also do it. But over here, the Darvies promised that the sellers were genuine, and it never told the name of the sellers of those products. Moreover, it was also involved in the promotion. The seller is located. Without becoming a member, one cannot effect a purchase on Darvies. In such case, giving exemption, the court opined that you cannot buy a product on Darvies.com until you've paid a fees to become a part of it. In such case, giving exemption of Section 79 would in fact amount to legalizing the infringing activity. The seller is not known. The person from whom the seller purchases the good is not known. It is also not known if the product is genuine through Darvies.com represent the same to be genuine. In view of these factors, Darvies.com cannot be termed as an intermediary that is entitled to protection under Section 79. In fact, the court also said there was meta tagging where Darvies in their source code had put the trademark of Christian Louboutin, and what it had done was caused the websites. Whenever you search for Google.com, Darvies.com on Google.com for Christian Louboutin, Darvies would come really on the top or second or third, which in turn would divert and cause monetary loss and trademark dilution for the Christian Louboutin mark. So the court, whereas they didn't hold the website liable for trademark infringement, it did hold that if you're doing these things, you cannot be called an intermediary. Very interesting case from that point of view for e-commerce platform. Now, the two cases I do want to talk about eventually is the Ramdev case, where a global injunction was given, and that 79(3)(b was very liberally construed, stating 79(3)(b means a network of computers, and since that network is world over, if an injunction can be given here, it can be closed the world over. That was the basic premise of that judgment. It is in the division bench right now. It has been admitted. The injunction is kind of on hold, and the matter was recently listed for 5th of March. However, due to COVID-19, it has not been able to progress. However, the one good case that was by Mr. Justice Manmohan was on UTV software versus 1337x.to. This was against Row websites which are actually stream the movies, and it's copyright infringement. This was something for the first time I've called a dynamic injunction, an injunction that is across all intermediaries, and Ashok Kumar's, basically an Ashok Kumar order for intermediaries to close down every website that is infringing the copyright. But however, one thing I do want to point out is that the intermediary rules 2018 came into effect recently. Now there is a problem with them. The problem is very simple, is that it is going to curb our freedom of speech. The government is in that aspect coming on board and trying to take over the social media free speech like they do. I'll point out 3 points from the ATV rules 2018 which have this issue. The number one issue is the traceability requirement, which under Rule 3.5, the draft requires intermediaries to be enable the tracing out of originator of information on their platforms as may be required by authorized government agencies. The most concerning aspect of this requirement is how it will affect intermediaries like WhatsApp and Signal, who provide personal communication services which are end-to-end encrypted, wherein even the service provider doesn't have access to the content of the message. Like if you send a message on WhatsApp, the end-to-end encryption means that no one can read that message, not even WhatsApp. However, if we are allowing this under a traceability requirement, it will lead to breaking of such encryption and thus compromising your private communication. And the most problem it will have is that it will be go against the right to privacy, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court in Q.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India. Proactive filtering of content under Rule 3.9. Again, like I've spoken about, the intermediary cannot look at it because then they become adjudicators and active participants. Proactive filtering of content will be a problem for anyone. So the draft rule requires intermediary to deploy automated tools, proactive filtering of unlawful content on their platforms. Online intermediaries are considered channels of distribution that play merely a neutral, technical, and non-adjudicatory role. This rule requires intermediaries to scrutinize user-generated content and determine its legality, a task which must be undertaken by the judiciary, considering that there are no clear standards of what is unlawful. What could be unlawful in one state could not be unlawful in another. What could be outrageous in one country or one state could not be outrageous in another. So, what decides that? And these vague terms are very prone to be misused by government agencies like the police and everything. Each time they want to go on a wrong path or they want to utilize it. Such vague terms have always, this we've seen with anti-terrorist legislations around the world, whether it's the Patriot Act or the UAPA. It's a major problem. This provision of proactive content filtering is against the judgment like of Shreya Singhal, wherein the Supreme Court of India has held that intermediaries are neutral platforms and they do not need to exercise their own judgment to decide what constitutes legitimate content. The final point I'll say is that local officer and appointment of nodal officers. Now this is especially concerning because this brings literally social media into your real life. Is what it does is that under Rule 3.7, the draft rule requires all intermediaries with more than 5 million users in India to be incorporated, have a permanent registered address in India with a physical address, and appoint a nodal officer and a senior functionary for 24-hour coordination with law enforcement agencies. At present, there is lack of clarity about what is the number of users refers to, whether it's daily, monthly, or yearly. The number of total users. To understand the implication of this requirement, reference to the user base of popular message. Like Hike and ShareChat have 100 million users or 25 million users respectively. The 5 million users specified under draft rule represent only 1% of the entire internet user base. We have a used internet. If 1%, yeah, it doesn't really. In India, which might have a substantial number of intermediaries under a new may cause many startups to bear the brunt, because this is not going to be a really big problem for the bigger players, but the now startups who are starting new apps or new programs, it could have a very bad effect on it. But this is not the first time that the government has asked, the court have already asked for grievance officers to be appointed. This was in the case of K.N. Govindacharyan versus Union of India, versus WC. You can look it up. Writ petition civil 3672/2012. The order is 23rd of August 2013. There was an order by Mr. Badutare and I think Sanjeev Sachdeva sir, on which it stated that whereas both, this is an old judgment, so it talks about Facebook and Awkward, that they have the grievance offices, but their numbers are not showed on Facebook or Orkut. So if someone has a problem, there is no way to contact them. The court ordered that the number should be actively seen. On the 26th of September 2013, which was after more than 2 weeks, the lawyers did come and they showed screenshots of the grievance officers' numbers being seen. So grievance office is another thing, but the way it's been done like that is different. There are a lot of other policies and everything. If anyone wants talks about, please, tech, internet, anything you guys want. Uh, I'm mostly on social media laws and everything which I'm working on, mostly influencer rights and social media influencers. Great talking to you. Thank you for listening to me and being that patient. For everyone who stayed throughout the program, thank you. Thank you so much. And to everyone who helped, the influencer Tisha Relia, Hiran Kamotsa, all of those who helped me in this project and helped me get great. I'm so thank you for all of you for doing that. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for the great session.